Hey y'all, do you have a dedicated test bench for when you're testing or troubleshooting PC parts? I didn't, so I'm going to show you how I printed my own using my Qidi Tech X-Max 3. My goal for this project was to create a test bench that could be configured in many ways and make it adaptable for future editions. This project was made possible with a large volume printer and unique filaments thanks to Qidi Tech. The Qidi Tech X-Max 3 is a very large printer, so having a friend to help with the setup is advised. If you don't have friends, you can easily find some on Hinge, Tor, or your local truck stop. I noticed some slits on the packaging, but luckily Qidi Tech was smart by wrapping up the printer with protection. For most people, everything you need to start printing can be found inside the box, like an English manual printed in color, a plastic sheet for initial bed leveling, spare fuses, bolts, nozzle penetrator, Allen wrenches, and a 7mm box wrench. There's also a flathead screwdriver. There's a steel hardened nozzle included for abrasive materials like I'll be using for this project, some rubber feet supports, a bed scraper, a network cable, and a 16GB USB stick with software and test prints. Right here, I wish Qidi Tech told their customers to unpack the unit on the ground to begin with. As buff as I am, this isn't light. Here's some bad advice. As a man, you should never ask for help. Always lift with your back, and make sure to fully lock your knees. Normally, you should never double up, but in this case, layering up does help avoid scratches on the clear parts. The rest of the printer parts are nested inside the heated chamber of the Qidi Tech X-Max 3. In this parts box you'll find the power cable, a 500-gram roll of Qidi Tech PLA filament that has its own printing profile, a glue stick which might help if you ever encounter some bad adhesion woes. Don't use it as lip balm though. Further in the box you were given a bag of desiccant for storing your filament. And lastly, the spool holder that also acts as a dry box is seen here with even more goodies inside of it. My hands are usually dry and ashy, so I was surprised to find them covered in grease or lube during filming. To avoid ruining your clothes or having to deal with accusations from your partner, make sure to check for greasy spots. To continue with the installation of the Qidi Tech X-Max 3, it needs to be turned on. If you have T-Rex arms or don't have space behind the unit, this will be a problem. The location of the power switch and spool holder will cause issues for people who don't have enough space to be able to walk behind the unit. Keep that in mind. The large color screen on the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 does a good job of walking you through on how to set up the printer. Just follow the directions and you should be good. The heated and sealed enclosure of the X-Max 3 is one of the main attractions of this printer. One thing that I wish Qidi Tech would include with their printers is a side cutter like the one I use to cut the cable ties. Qidi Tech gives you many tools and it's a shame this was not included. These cables might seem excessive, but they keep the bed stabilized during shipping. These screws are part of the redundant system that stabilizes the bed during transport. Marie Kondo wouldn't approve, but I love hoarding screws like I love collecting bathwater samples. With the cable ties and screws gone, the bed can now raise for the next steps of the Qidi X-Max 3 setup. On its way up, don't forget to remove the remaining packing foam under the bed. This project will be using filaments that have been impregnated with either carbon or glass fibers. Filaments with carbon or glass fibers impregnated in them will wear away conventional nozzles quite quickly. Just the ripping and the tearing, one could say. Because of this, I'm swapping to the hardened steel nozzle included with the Qidi X-Max 3. The hardened steel nozzle will be more resistant to the friction and rubbing caused by those naughty carbon and glass fibers. Keep in mind that this is not the normal setup procedure, since I wanted to get the hard nozzle inserted before the bed leveling procedure. This is because you must bring the nozzle and bed temperatures up to match your desired filament temperatures and needs. Qidi Tech could have just provided an extra nozzle, but instead they included almost the whole hot end. If you're watching this Qidi Tech, give yourself a pat in the back. Here you can see the hardened steel nozzle on the left and the stock nozzle on the right. Let me know in the comments if you like it hard. Compared to my artillery Sidewinder X1, the hot end swap with the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 was simpler and easier. With the hardened steel nozzle, I hope I won't have to change it out for a new one for a long time. Proceeding with the setup, I noticed a bug where I was not able to set my desired 110 degrees Celsius value, but thankfully I could not replicate this bug after. The clear panels are nice for a quick glance, but here you'll notice how much distortion they have at certain angles. Using the screen and the provided bed leveling plastic sheet, the calibration process is very simple compared to fiddling with springs on my last printer. After rubbing out the bed leveling sheet, the rest of the calibration is automated by the machine with its built-in probe. Input shaping tuning vibrates the entire unit like a Hitachi wand, but hopefully it finishes off with cleaner prints. Switching it up to the back, I started the assembly of the filament spool holder. Just another reminder, if you have been considering this printer, you need space enough to walk freely behind it. It's neat that the spool holder has space for a dry pack, but I wonder if adding active heating would have been worth the price increase. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you're using 500 gram rolls of filament, Qidi Tech includes spacers for the spool holder. Now I'll be honest, the integration of the spool holder is nice on paper, but I had a lot of trouble getting it to work. My troubles aren't universal since it may have been due to the filament I was using, which is quite stiff and brittle. Before filming this section, I left this new filament spool in my dehydrator for about 8 hours, so the filament should have been dry. But the nature of impregnated filaments is to be brittle and stiff. So to avoid the sharp bends and routing of the stock filament spool holder, I instead used a separate unit with integrated heating in a different location. Even with the spool holder relocated, I still managed to snap the filament numerous times while trying to route it through the filament detection unit. But, like often, sliding it in repeatedly will eventually give you what you want. With the setup complete, it was finally time to print. Before starting each print, you have the option to perform bed mesh leveling, which should ensure proper Z height, but keep in mind it adds time to the overall print duration. The first layer was laid perfectly, and I didn't even need any Z offset. I was alarmed to hear some collision noises from the unit, and found out it was coming from a clip colliding with the body of the printer. Shaving off about 5mm from the bottom of the plastic panel should give enough clearance to prevent this. The print still came out well, but poses a failure point and is clearly an oversight by Qidi Tech. Midway through the print, it was good to see the corners weren't warping. It's poor practice to design parts so flat and large, but I really wanted to stress the unit out. If someone told me that the top ironing was turned on, I would believe them since the top layer was so smooth. Ironing is off by default, by the way. I was thrilled to see the first print successfully completed, and it didn't warp. I had to add a magnetic bed to my previous printer, and was glad it came stock on the Qidi Tech X-Max 3. I proceeded with printing another part using the PET carbon fiber filament and was not disappointed. Here I'm using ABS impregnated with glass fibers, and it too did not disappoint. Adhesion was great during printing, and the parts released with ease once things cooled down. Qidi Tech's profile for this filament actually exceeds the print temp rating labeled on the spool. I noticed the print profile was set to 320 degrees Celsius. Just another reminder to be careful when bending the filament. Here's some close-ups of the completed prints. The Qidi Tech X-Max 3 is unique not only because of its enclosure, but also its heated chamber, which is needed when printing with ABS. I tested this out by printing the tall part to try and force layer adhesion problems, but the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 nailed it with its heated chamber. Just like its carbon fiber counterpart, this glass fiber impregnated filament is also brittle. For my future projects, I'll dive a little deeper into tweaking the printer settings, but for this video I wanted to show you what to expect with the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 out of the box. So far, I've been really happy with the results. I expected delamination and warping with this print, but I'm happy to see a successful print instead, and the supports came off easily and cleanly. Guess who dropped a power supply on their print? Me. I am the klutz who damaged her otherwise great print. I'll take some blame for the slight warping I encountered. My insulated garage was about 14 degrees Celsius and the part printed flat, but I opened the enclosure door after the print. I came back and it warped while cooling. Has this ever happened to you? With the prints done, it was time to assemble everything together. As usual, I'm going to be penetrating my parts with hot heat inserts. I had to bump up the soldering iron to 300 degrees Celsius to make things slide easier. This particular build uses a lot of heat inserts, but you don't need to fill every hole you see, just the ones you might need. For instance, I'm only using 4 of the PCI bracket holes here. When I was designing this part in CAD, I was worried some of the sections were too thin, but the Qidi Tech PET with impregnated carbon fiber has proven to be more than strong despite the thinner cross sections. There was so much penetration during this project that I was almost empty by the end. You'll also notice I left some of the holes in the bottom unfilled for now. And you guessed it, no part was left without being penetrated. For now, we're going to pause on the penetration and focus on feet instead. The feet on this part are optional, but I added them for a situation that I'll show later. And also, I just love feet. Do you agree? In its first configuration, I'll be installing the standoffs to accommodate for the STX form factor. Not many cases exist for STX, but since I enjoy making custom cases for it, I needed a way to test it securely. STX only has a power adapter, but other form factors usually require a power supply, so a bracket that will hold the PSU is next to be attached. In the horizontal configuration, you'll want the power supply installed in its center position. Here, I'll be showing you how to use an SFX power supply in place of an ATX version. Your SFX power supply should have come with an adapter like the one shown here. Once you have consent, you can slowly slide the PSU in place and screw it. With the ATX standoffs installed, you now have a stable test bench for ITX motherboards, SFX power supplies, and CPUs with built-in graphics. And the power cables can easily slip through the holes of the base. If you have a dedicated GPU, you can install the PCI bracket to stabilize your GPU. I'm using thumb screws to affix the GPU on the test bench. This test bench can also use micro ATX and standard ATX motherboards. And like you've probably already guessed, a full-size PSU can be installed to run more power-hungry configurations. And once again, the PCI bracket is more than strong enough to stabilize a full-size GPU like the one shown here. Since water cooling is more commonplace now, you can attach an AI cooler to the test bench with the corresponding bracket as shown. With this, you should be able to test, troubleshoot, or even show off any configuration of components. You can also mirror the AIO bracket in your slicer to print and attach another one on the other side. To showcase how versatile this test bench can be, I'll be including some example pieces that can transform this test bench to your liking. I'll be posting a link below for you to download these files. Don't be silly like me, remove parts to change configurations. If you haven't had your fill of feet today, I hope I can help because here's more. Without the filaments impregnated with carbon and glass fibers, I wouldn't be manhandling this test bench around like this. But the filaments I use make the unit very strong. It's not only the filaments that allow such strength. Using the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 means I can print large parts in one piece to avoid gluing, melting, or pounding parts together, like in this video linked above. With the simple additions to the base test bench, I can let my imagination run wild with the ways I can configure the system. The motherboard here has built-in power and reset switches, and that caused me to forget to add one in. I quickly designed one, but then I faced an issue with the printer. For some reason, the nozzle was too far from the print bed and was dribbling out filament instead of laying a thin layer down. This was surprising since the previous prints were going so well and I didn't change any settings on the printer. I even tried calibrating multiple times, but the same failures would occur. After some research and coming out empty from experience of other owners, I decided to upgrade the firmware of the printer to the newest one from Qidi Tech's website. The update process took a very long time to complete, so be prepared to spend what felt like hours watching the progress go by. But after the update, all was well. The printer had great first layers, I was able to complete the print, and my dad even came home with milk finally. I mentioned the space requirements for owning this printer, but I'll also advise on finding a stable platform for it, unlike what you see here. The printer can go upwards to 600mm per second, and it can really shake things up when it gets going. Here's a quick comparison between the failed print and the successful print. It's really odd how the final top layers corrected themselves. I'm still relieved that a simple firmware update was all that was needed. If you've stuck around this long, you're probably wondering why hasn't there been more penetration. But good things come to those who wait, so here you go. The assembly of this part is pretty straightforward. The USB ports just screw in. The power button will test how skilled you are with your finger game. Then just slide those LEDs in. And then fill those two holes with screws. Voila, you now have a power switch and some USB ports up front. Despite all the components installed on the test bench, there is little to no flex when lifting and moving it around. Using these impregnated filaments is pretty confidence-inspiring for future projects. I'm going to be using this printer for the long term, and I'm really excited to be designing cases to fit more standard ATX parts, since many have asked for this in my comments. And the large print area of the Qidi Tech X-Max 3 will allow for that. With the ups and downs I pointed out in this video, I'd love to hear what y'all think about this printer. And also let me know what you think about the test bench and what you'd like to see added to it. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to show you what I have in store.